The chains bit into Cecilia Keller's wrists as she slumped against the rough wooden post. The moonlight through the barn's broken slats her only witness to the silent tears that slid down her dirt-streaked face. 6 hours had passed since her stepfather had locked her in here punishment for defending her mother from his drunken rage, and the chill of the Dakota Territory night was seeping into her bones. Deadwood, South Dakota in 1878 was unforgiving to most, but particularly cruel to women with no protectors. At 22, Cecilia had learned this lesson repeatedly since her mother had remarried 2 years ago. William Thatcher had seemed respectable when he'd courted her widowed mother, but the gold fever that had drawn him to these hills had twisted whatever decency might have once existed in him. A sound outside the barn made Cecilia stiffen. The heavy padlock on the door rattled, then there was a distinct metallic snap. The barn door creaked open, allowing a broader shaft of moonlight to spill across the dirt floor. "Hello," Cecilia called, her voice hoarse from earlier screaming that no one had heeded. "Who's there?" A tall silhouette filled the doorway, the unmistakable shape of a cowboy hat atop the figure's head. The man stepped forward cautiously, and Cecilia pressed herself back against the post. "Miss, you all right?" His voice was low, gentle, nothing like her stepfather's whiskey-roughened growl. As he moved closer, the moonlight revealed his features' strong jawline, concerned eyes, and a day's worth of stubble. He couldn't have been more than 26 or 27. "I heard the shouting earlier," he explained, kneeling beside her and examining the chains with a frown. "Waited till that bastard left for the saloon before coming to check. He'll kill you if he catches you here," Cecilia whispered urgently. The man gave a tight smile. "He can try." He pulled something from his pocket, a set of tools that glinted in the moonlight. "Name's Thomas Turner." "Most folks call me Tom, Cecilia Keller," she replied, wincing as he manipulated the lock on her chains. "Well, Miss Keller, this ain't right. What he's done to you." There was another snap as the lock gave way. "There we go." The chains fell away, and Cecilia rubbed her raw wrists, relief flooding through her. "Thank you, Mr. Turner, but I can't leave. He'll come after me, and your mother sent me." Cecilia froze. "What?" Tom stood and offered his hand to help her up. "She came to the livery where I work, said her husband had gone too far this time. She's waiting at Doc Sullivan's office, got herself pretty badly hurt standing up to him after he locked you out here." Fear clutched at Cecilia's heart. How badly? "She'll live, but you both need to get out of Deadwood, tonight." His expression was grave. "Thatcher's got friends among the miners. Law won't do much to help you." Cecilia took his hand and stood on shaky legs. "But where would we go? How would we get there?" Tom led her toward the door, checking outside before ushering her into the cool night air. "I've got a horse waiting, best gelding in my stable. He'll take you to Cheyenne. I've got a sister there who'll help you and your mother find work." "But that's your horse," Cecilia protested. "Your livelihood, I've got others," he cut her off. "And this one's worth it if it means you'll be safe." Something in his eyes made her breath catch, not pity but a fierce protectiveness that seemed to burn from within. "Why would you help us? You don't even know us." Tom looked away for a moment. "Let's just say I've seen what men like your stepfather can do, and I couldn't live with myself if I didn't help when I could." They moved silently through the shadows behind the row of buildings that made up the main street of Deadwood. The town was still awake, piano music and raucous laughter spilled from the saloons, the glow of oil lamps illuminating the wooden sidewalks. "We need to hurry," Tom whispered, guiding her with a light hand on her back. "Doc said he'd only be able to keep your mother hidden for a couple hours at most. Thatcher's bound to come looking for her soon enough." Cecilia's heart pounded as they ducked behind the assayer's office, avoiding a group of miners stumbling home. The journey to Doc Sullivan's small office at the edge of town seemed endless, every shadow potentially concealing her stepfather or one of his friends. When they finally reached the doctor's back door, Tom knocked softly in a pattern 3 quick taps, too slow. The door opened immediately, revealing the tired face of Doc Sullivan, a gray-haired man in his 50s. "Quickly now," he urged, pulling Cecilia inside. "Your mother's resting." Cecilia rushed to the small cot in the corner where her mother lay, her face bruised, a bandage around her forearm. "Mama," she whispered, dropping to her knees beside the cot. Elizabeth Keller's eyes fluttered open, relief washing over her battered features. "Ceci, oh thank God." She reached out with her good arm, clutching her daughter's hand. "I'm so sorry." "I should have never let him, SHH," Cecilia soothed. "It's not your fault, but we need to leave now." Doc Sullivan moved to a cabinet, retrieving a small bundle. "I've packed some supplies, bandages, laudanum for your mother's pain, some food for the journey." Tom stood by the door, peering occasionally through the curtained window. "We need to move. Thatcher just came out of the Silver Dollar Saloon. He's headed this way with a couple of men." Fear surged through Cecilia as she helped her mother to her feet. "She can't ride alone," she realized, looking to Tom. "Not with these injuries." "I know," Tom said grimly. "Change of plan. I've got a wagon hidden behind the livery, not as fast as horseback, but it'll have to do." Doc Sullivan nodded. "Go out the back, through the alley. I'll stall them if they come this way." "Thank you, Doctor," Elizabeth said weakly. "Just get to safety," he replied. "And maybe someday when things settle, let me know you made it." Tom led them through the back door and into the darkness, moving as quickly as Elizabeth's condition would allow. The sounds of angry voices from the direction of the main street spurred them on. "He's figured out you're gone," Tom whispered. "We need to hurry." They reached the livery stable without incident, and Tom directed them to a small wagon concealed behind the building. A strong-looking chestnut gelding was already hitched to it. "This was supposed to be yours," Tom told Cecilia, patting the horse's flank. "Guess he'll still be taking you to safety, just not the way I'd planned." He helped Elizabeth into the wagon bed where he'd arranged blankets to form a makeshift pallet. "Stay low," he instructed. "I'll drive. Cecilia, you stay with your mother." "You can't come with us," Cecilia protested. "Your life is here." Tom's laugh was hollow. "Not much of a life." "I've been thinking of moving on anyway." He glanced toward the main street, where shouts were becoming more distinct. "Besides, Thatcher knows I work at the livery. Won't take him long to figure out who helped you." Cecilia climbed into the wagon beside her mother, pulling a blanket over them both. "I can't ask you to give up everything." "You didn't ask," Tom said simply, climbing onto the driver's seat. "I offered." With a flick of the reins, they were moving, keeping to the shadows as they navigated behind buildings toward the southern edge of town. They had almost reached the outskirts when a shout went up behind them. "There, that's Turner's wagon," Tom cursed under his breath and slapped the reins. "Hold on," the wagon lurched forward as the horse broke into a gallop. Cecilia held her mother steady as they bumped along the rutted road, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. "They'll follow," Tom called over his shoulder. "But most of them are too drunk to ride far tonight. We'll have a head start." Cecilia looked back at the twinkling lights of Deadwood, a town that had brought her family nothing but pain. Yet somehow, in its darkest corner, she'd found an unexpected ally. "Where will we go?" she asked, raising her voice over the rattle of the wagon. "I told you, Cheyenne. My sister Catherine runs a boarding house there." He glanced back with a small smile. "Unless you've got somewhere else in mind," Cecilia shook her head, returning his smile cautiously. "Cheyenne sounds perfect." As they traveled through the night, Elizabeth drifted in and out of sleep, the laudanum dulling her pain. Cecilia remained vigilant, watching the road behind them for signs of pursuit while trying to process the sudden upheaval of her life. "Why did you really help us?" she finally asked Tom as dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Tom was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was tight with emotion. "My sister, not Catherine in Cheyenne, but my youngest sister, Margaret. She had a husband like your stepfather. None of us knew how bad it was until—" He took a deep breath. "Until it was too late. No one helped her when they could have. I swore I'd never make the same mistake." Cecilia's throat tightened. "I'm sorry about your sister." "So am I." He glanced back at her. "But maybe this time the story ends differently." They traveled for 3 days, taking back roads and trails to avoid main thoroughfares where Thatcher or his friends might be watching. Tom proved to be as skilled a survivalist as he was a horseman, finding safe places to camp and hunting small game for their meals. By the second day, Elizabeth was strong enough to sit up in the wagon and converse, though the bruises on her face had darkened to alarming shades of purple and yellow. On the third evening, as they sat around a small campfire, Elizabeth watched her daughter and Tom with thoughtful eyes. "You two remind me of how Jacob and I were," she said suddenly, referring to Cecilia's father who had died of fever 5 years earlier. "He was kind like you, Mr. Turner." gentle but strong when it mattered. Tom looked embarrassed by the comparison. Just doing what's right, madam. Few men would define what's right as abandoning their livelihood to help strangers, Elizabeth pointed out. I told you I was looking to move on anyway, Tom insisted, though his ears had reddened slightly. Deadwood was getting too crowded for my taste. Cecilia smiled at his discomfort, finding it endearing. Over the past days, she'd come to appreciate not just his bravery, but his quiet competence and unexpected flashes of humor. There was a steadiness to him that she found comforting after the unpredictable violence of her stepfather. Well, whatever your reasons, Elizabeth said, we're grateful. Aren't we, Ceci? Very grateful, Cecilia agreed, meeting Tom's eyes across the fire. Something unspoken passed between them, a connection that made her heart beat a little faster. They reached Cheyenne late the following afternoon. The town was considerably larger and more established than Deadwood, with proper streets and substantial buildings of brick and stone alongside the wooden structures. Tom directed the wagon to a neat two-story house on a side street, painted white with blue trim, and a sign that read Turner Boarding House hanging beside the door. Before they had even come to a complete stop, a woman burst through the front door, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, her face alight with surprise. Thomas Turner, you didn't write that you were coming. She hurried down the steps, then stopped short at the sight of Elizabeth and Cecilia in the wagon. And you've brought company, Catherine, Tom greeted his sister with a tired smile. Sorry for the surprise, it was a bit of an emergency departure. He jumped down from the driver's seat and quickly explained the situation while helping Elizabeth from the wagon. Catherine's expression softened as she took in Elizabeth's injuries. You poor dear. Come inside, both of you. Any friend of my brother's is welcome here. She shot Tom a meaningful look, though a telegram would have been appreciated. Wasn't exactly time, Tom muttered, helping Cecilia down. His hands lingered on her waist a moment longer than necessary, and she felt that same flutter in her chest that had become increasingly common in his presence. The interior of the boarding house was clean and comfortable, with simple but well-maintained furnishings. Catherine led Elizabeth to a downstairs bedroom, insisting she needed rest before any further discussions. Cecilia followed, helping her mother settle in while Tom and Catherine spoke quietly in the hallway. Your young man seems nice, Elizabeth commented once they were alone, a knowing look in her eyes despite her exhaustion. Cecilia busied herself arranging pillows to avoid her mother's gaze. He's not my young man, Mama, he's just kind, MMM. Elizabeth didn't sound convinced. The way he looks at you reminds me of your father, like you're something precious he's afraid to hope for. You're imagining things, Cecilia insisted, though her cheeks warmed at the thought. It's only been 3 days. Sometimes that's all it takes, her mother said softly. When it's right, you know it quickly. Cecilia had no response to that. Instead, she kissed her mother's forehead and promised to return soon, stepping into the hallway just as Catherine was heading upstairs. I've put you in the blue room at the top of the stairs, Catherine told her with a warm smile. It's small, but it has a lovely view of the garden. Tom's helping bring in your things. We don't have much, Cecilia admitted, just what the doctor packed for us. Catherine waved a dismissive hand. We'll sort all that out tomorrow. For now, rest. You're safe here. The concept of safety was still so foreign that Cecilia almost couldn't process it. For 2 years, she'd lived in constant tension, waiting for the next explosion of her stepfather's temper. The sudden absence of that fear left her feeling oddly unmoored. She found Tom in the front room, staring out the window at the street beyond, his posture tense. Do you think he followed us? She asked, coming to stand beside him. Tom shook his head. Not yet. But men like Thatcher don't give up easily, especially when their pride is wounded. What will you do now? Cecilia asked. Will you stay in Cheyenne? He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. For a while, Catherine can always use help around the boarding house. And I want to make sure you and your mother are truly safe before I... He trailed off. Before you move on, Cecilia finished for him, trying to ignore the disappointment that settled in her stomach at the thought. Tom studied her face for a long moment. That was the plan, he said finally. But plans change. Before she could ask what he meant, Catherine called them for supper, and the moment was lost. Over the following weeks, life at the Turner boarding house fell into a comfortable routine. Elizabeth's injuries healed, and she began helping Catherine with the cooking and cleaning, grateful for the safe haven they'd found. Cecilia secured a position at the local millinery shop, discovering she had a talent for hat making that the owner was quick to nurture. Tom remained in Cheyenne, working odd jobs and helping his sister with repairs around the boarding house. He was often gone during the day, but always returned for supper, during which he would entertain them with stories from around town or memories from his and Catherine's childhood. Cecilia found herself looking forward to those evening meals, to the way Tom's eyes would seek hers across the table when he reached the punchline of a story, to the deep rumble of his laugh when she shared anecdotes from the hat shop. There was an ease between them now, a friendship blossoming into something more that neither seemed quite ready to name. One Sunday afternoon in late August, nearly 2 months after their arrival in Cheyenne, Tom invited Cecilia for a walk. The summer heat had finally broken, leaving the day pleasantly warm with a gentle breeze. "Catherine mentioned you've never seen the river that runs south of town," he said as they strolled past the edge of the business district. "Thought you might like to." "That would be lovely," Cecilia agreed, enjoying the rare opportunity for time alone with him. At the boarding house, there were always other guests or Catherine or her mother around. Here, walking side by side down the dusty road, she could pretend for a moment that they were just a man and woman out for a Sunday stroll with no shadows hanging over them. "How are you settling in?" Tom asked after they'd walked in companionable silence for a while. "Really settling in, I mean." Cecilia considered the question. "Better than I expected. The nightmares are less frequent now, and I don't jump at every loud noise anymore," she smiled wryly. "Progress, I suppose." "It is," Tom agreed seriously. "Healing takes time. Is that what you did after your sister?" she asked gently. "Heal?" Tom was quiet for several steps. "Not really. I ran instead. Moved from town to town, never staying long enough to put down roots. It wasn't until Catherine wrote about starting the boarding house that I even considered stopping somewhere for more than a few months. And then Deadwood." "And then Deadwood," he confirmed. "I thought maybe I could make a fresh start there, but the place has a way of bringing out the worst in people. Too much greed, too much desperation." He glanced at her. "Though I can't regret it entirely since it's where I met you." Cecilia's heart stuttered at his words and the intensity in his eyes. "I'm glad you were there that night," she said softly. "I don't know what would have happened if don't," Tom cut her off, taking her hand in his. "Don't think about it. You're here now. You're safe." The warmth of his hand around hers sent a thrill through her body. For a moment, they stood there on the empty road, the connection between them almost tangible in the air. The sound of an approaching wagon broke the spell, and Tom reluctantly released her hand as they stepped aside to let it pass. But something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that night in the barn. They reached the river soon after, a wide, slow-moving expanse of water flanked by cottonwood trees. Tom led her to a grassy spot on the bank, and they sat watching the play of sunlight on the water. "I used to dream of places like this when I was a child in Chicago," Cecilia confessed. "Open spaces, trees, rivers. My father would tell me stories about the West, promised to take me someday." She smiled sadly. "He never got the chance." "And when you finally got here, it wasn't the dream you expected," Tom observed. "No," she agreed, "but that doesn't mean I can't still find beauty in it." She looked around at the peaceful scene, "Like this place, or—" She hesitated, then met his eyes. "Or in the kindness of a stranger who risked everything to help someone he didn't know." Tom's expression softened. "I don't think we're strangers anymore, Cecilia." "No," she whispered, "we're not." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "I told myself I was just doing the right thing that night, that I would see you safely to Cheyenne and then move on like I always do." His hand cupped her cheek. "But I don't want to move on anymore." Cecilia leaned into his touch. "Then don't." When Tom kissed her, it was tentative at first, as though he feared she might break or pull away. But Cecilia responded with all the emotion that had been building within her: gratitude, affection, and a growing love she could no longer deny. His arms went around her, drawing her closer, and for the first time since her father's death, Cecilia felt truly safe. They returned to the boarding house hand in hand, both aware that this new understanding between them would raise questions. But the only reaction they received was Elizabeth's knowing smile and Catherine's pleased nod, as though they had both been waiting for this development all along. Over the next few weeks, their courtship progressed with a sweetness that healed old wounds for them both. Tom found steady work as a farrier, his skill with horses earning him a reputation around Cheyenne. Cecilia continued at the millinery, saving her earnings and sending some to Doc Sullivan in Deadwood, who had written to confirm that William Thatcher had left town after losing his claim in a poker game. The threat that had hung over them seemed to dissipate with autumn's arrival, allowing them to look toward the future with hope rather than fear. On a crisp October evening, Tom took Cecilia back to the river where they'd first acknowledged their feelings. The trees were ablaze with fall colors, leaves drifting lazily to the ground around them. "I've been thinking," he said, his usual confidence replaced by an endearing nervousness. "About roots." "Roots," Cecilia repeated, puzzled. "Yes, the kind you put down when you find somewhere you belong." He took her hands in his. "I've been running so long, I forgot what it felt like to want to stay somewhere, to build something that lasts." Understanding dawned on Cecilia's face as Tom dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "I know it hasn't been that long," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "But I also know that some things you just recognize right from the start. The way I recognized that I needed to help you that night in the barn, the way I recognized that I was falling in love with you on the journey here." He swallowed hard. "The way I know with absolute certainty that I want to spend my life with you." Tears filled Cecilia's eyes as Tom reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "Catherine helped me pick it out," he admitted with a small smile. "Said a Turner man needs all the help he can get when it comes to matters of taste." Cecilia laughed through her tears. "It's beautiful, Cecilia Keller," Tom said solemnly. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of building a life with me here or wherever else our path might lead?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Tom. Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, then rose to pull her into his arms, kissing her with a joy that erased all memory of the pain that had brought them together. They married in November, a small ceremony at the local church with Catherine, Elizabeth, and a few friends from town in attendance. Elizabeth, fully recovered and happier than Cecilia had seen her in years, wept openly as they exchanged vows. "Your father would be so proud," she told Cecilia at the modest reception afterward. "He always said you had the best judgment of anyone he knew, and he was right." Tom overheard and smiled, putting his arm around his new wife. "Smart man, your father." "He would have liked you," Cecilia told him, leaning into his embrace. "Almost as much as I do." Tom and Cecilia moved into a small house not far from the boarding house, which Tom had purchased with his savings and the money he'd been earning as a farrier. It needed work. The roof leaked in places, and the porch sagged dangerously, but they tackled the repairs together, turning it slowly into a home. By spring, they had settled into married life with a contentment neither had dared hope for before. Elizabeth remained at Catherine's boarding house, having found both friendship and purpose there. She visited often, bringing baked goods and news from town. It was during one such visit in early May that Elizabeth arrived looking troubled, a letter clutched in her hand. "What is it, Mama?" Cecilia asked, setting down the curtains she'd been mending. "A letter from Doc Sullivan," Elizabeth said, sitting heavily at the kitchen table. "William is dead." Cecilia went still. "How?" "Shot in a dispute over a gambling debt in a mining camp near Rapid City." Elizabeth's expression was complex, not grief exactly, but a somber acknowledgement of a life wasted. "The doctor thought we should know." Tom came in from the workshop he'd built behind the house, sensing the shift in mood. "Everything all right?" Cecilia explained the news as Elizabeth stared at the letter in her hands. "I keep thinking of the man I thought I was marrying," she said quietly. "He was so different in the beginning, or perhaps I just wanted to see something that wasn't there." "People show you who they are eventually," Tom said, sitting beside her. "The trick is believing them when they do." Elizabeth nodded, then seemed to shake off her melancholy. "Well, that's the past now, and I've come with other news too, happier news." She smiled at Cecilia. "Catherine's taking on a new boarder next week, a widower from Denver with 2 young children. She's asked if I'd be willing to help look after them while he's at work. That sounds perfect for you, Cecilia said, knowing how much her mother missed having children to care for. You always were happiest when you had little ones around. Speaking of which, Elizabeth said with a pointed look at her daughter's midsection, when might I expect to have a grandchild to spoil? Cecilia and Tom exchanged a smile, a private communication that made Elizabeth's eyes widen. Already, she gasped. You're already due in November, Cecilia confirmed, her hand drifting to her still flat stomach, around our anniversary. Elizabeth embraced her daughter, then Tom, tears of joy replacing the earlier sadness. Oh, this is wonderful news. Have you told Catherine yet? We wanted you to be the first to know, Tom said, his pride evident in every word. But I imagine my sister will figure it out soon enough. She notices everything. The news of the baby seemed to fully dispel the shadow cast by the letter about William. As Elizabeth hurried back to the boarding house to share the news with Catherine, Cecilia watched her go with a lightness in her heart. Are you all right? Tom asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. About your stepfather, I mean. Cecilia considered the question carefully. I think I am. I don't wish death on anyone, but knowing he can never threaten us again, it's a relief. She turned in his arms to face him. It feels like the last piece of the past falling away, leaving only the future. A future I can't wait to build with you, Tom said, kissing her softly. And this little one? He placed his hand gently over hers on her stomach. Their daughter, Elizabeth Catherine Turner, was born on a snowy night in late November, exactly 1 year and 2 days after their wedding. She had Tom's dark hair and Cecilia's green eyes, and from the moment she took her first breath, she was surrounded by love not just from her parents, but from her grandmother and aunt as well. As Cecilia watched Tom cradle their daughter before the fire on Christmas Eve, singing softly to her while snowflakes drifted past the window, she marveled at how much had changed in a single year. From chains in a barn to this warm home filled with love, from the terror of that night to the profound peace of this moment. Tom caught her watching and smiled, that same smile that had given her hope in her darkest hour. What are you thinking about, Mrs. Turner? How strange life is, she said, moving to sit beside him. How a moment of cruelty led to all this happiness. She touched their daughter's tiny hand. If he hadn't chained me in that barn, we would have found each other some other way, Tom said with quiet certainty. Some things are just meant to be. Cecilia rested her head on his shoulder, watching the firelight play across their daughter's sleeping face. I believe you're right. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Cheyenne in a blanket of white that muffled all sound, creating a perfect stillness. Inside the small house on the edge of town, the Turner family remained wrapped in the warmth of their love, a love born in the darkest of circumstances but nurtured in the light of freedom, growing stronger with each passing day. And as the years passed, the story of how they met became a family legend, told and retold to their children and eventually their grandchildren the night a brave cowboy broke a lock and offered not just his horse, but his heart, to a woman in need. A reminder that even in the harshest of places, in the cruelest of times, love could still bloom, unexpected and unstoppable, changing the course of lives forever.